Well, for Cliff and I, many of our leadership skills or lessons were honed as a result of spectacular mistakes or failures. The longer you've been around, the more likely it is you've developed some scar tissues along the way. And for sure, Cliff and I have some scar tissue. And when we say failure, what do we mean? Rarely, if ever, do we mean that there was a failure to actually lead. In other words, abrogating the responsibility inherent in a leadership position. Now, leadership mistakes are made with the best of intentions and with the best information available in the time allowed by humans trying as hard as they can to do the right thing, influenced by 1,000 things in and out of their control.
And so this period of instruction, or this webinar, this topic is about what to do as a leader when you screw up. There is sort of an insinuation there that it's an honest mistake, if you will. Certainly there are cases when you have somebody who just flat out messes up as a leader and has to go. If they break the law or they do something, or maybe they do just screw up in such a dramatic way that they just can't lead anymore and they have to step down. What we're talking about is the shy of catastrophic mistakes. And what we're going to talk about today is, we're going to provide a framework for what to do when those mistakes happen. And you have to do something, but maybe you don't really know. And so, as with so many of our discussions, we're not so much giving you you got to do this list as a way to think about the problem set and a way to approach those sorts of things. So welcome to Leading from North of Center. I am Cliff W. Gilmore. I'm joined by my colleague, VJ Fitzpatrick Jr. And today we are going to show those tips and pointers on what to do when you have a Job Bluth moment.
So you're expected to make mistakes. That one makes me laugh. You're expected to make mistakes. The key is not to repeat them and to learn. And we're going to talk more about that later. But let's start with a hypothetical example just to kind of set the stage. A couple episodes back, we talked about delegation and the importance of delegation to a leader. Let's say you've delegated a task to your team. Since you've just been promoted from that team and you're confident in their abilities to produce great work, and you know that you all are always on the same sheet of music, shouldn't be a problem. Since you're very busy with meetings and new leader training, you've given your team awesome guidance, advice, and direction to run with, and told them you need the finished product by the time the brief is due to your boss. Almost no wiggle room. You don't have much extra time to receive it early anyways, but you're not worried. They got this. Just before the brief, you receive what your team has done. They tell you that you were tough to get a hold of. So they've made some assumptions on a few sticking points to meet the deadlines. And since you weren't there for the Overwatch part, you review the product as you're walking in, and to your abject horror, they have missed the mark. You're going to find out a couple things here. One of them is, when the shit hits the fan, leadership is a very lonely place. The other thing is, you're going to know, and so will everyone else, what kind of leader you are by what you do next. Do you own it? Explain it? Blame it on others? It's going to make a difference. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about those leaders who blame things on others because we assume they're not listening today.
And as you might imagine, as we have promised, we have a series of points to give you today for handling a mistake. And there are 5 of them this time around, but we're still going to stick to our 15-minute cycle. We'll run for about 10 more minutes, and then we'll open the floor to questions for anybody who might have them. Here are the 5 points we're going to hit today very briefly. When you screw up, here's what you got to do. You have to acknowledge it. You have to own it. You have to apologize. Then you need to take corrective action. And finally, move on. So let's start with discussing the acknowledgement and owning piece of this thing. So first part of a mistake out there is that you have to say, oh gosh, yep, that's a mistake. Could have done better. Should have done better. There it is. That's all the depth of insight we have to offer on that first stage of acknowledging the mistake when it happens. And that takes right into that second piece. You have to own it. You have to accept responsibility for that thing. So, if you screw up as a leader, and you start with, oh man, crap. Oh, I screwed up. That's an error. All right. And then it's as simple as, it's my responsibility. I'm responsible for this. I need to clean this up. Even if the rest of the team has to have a role in the cleanup activity, you need to own it. And so there's a couple of things to think about here. One of those is that I was misunderstood rarely works. Maybe you were, but the heart of this thing is, this is the mistake. This is what happened. I'm responsible for it, and let's move on. And that gets us to, not moving on quite yet, BJ and I, let's moving on. That gets us to, oh gosh, a note I have in here where I'm supposed to shut up and let BJ say something pithy and trite.
I don't know about that. But when we say own, Cliff, do we mean every time? In other words, or using your words, I guess, do I always need to take the caning as the leader?
That's a fair callback. I am prone to say that my role as a leader is to share the credit and take the caning. But you raise a good point, BJ, that yes, as leaders, we are responsible for everything our team members do or fail to do. But that's not the same as taking the blame for every mistake someone else makes. You can have times when somebody does something blatantly illegal, blatantly violates a policy, repeatedly violates a policy, tries to cover something up, lies. That kind of stuff is really not acceptable. You're responsible as the leader for making sure those things don't happen and cleaning up after they do. But that doesn't mean that you have to, that in taking the responsibility for the team, that you're taking the blame. There's a difference there. And we do a lot here at North of Center talking about the words that shape your mindset and the importance and meaning of words. Responsibility and blame, not the same thing. But as a leader, you do have to accept the responsibility for the mistake that's made, even if it happens down inside your team. So there are times when somebody will make a mistake and it's pretty black and white. They've got to be fired. They got to go. But if we come back to that idea that as a leader, you're starting from a position of a relationship with your followers, your subordinates, your team members, and that what you're trying to do is build a relationship of trust with those folks. You give them the benefit of the doubt that if they have screwed up, they have done so sincerely, and they were working within the GAD that you provided. Now what you need to do then is go ahead and address that issue properly. So let's see, man, we're just out of rhythm today, but I'm going to go back to you, BJ.
It's not just illegal, Cliff. Habitually lazy employees, unmotivated, those who break the rules or violate policies, they have to be dealt with. It comes down to the CBL truth. Enduring leadership requires trust. And if you can't trust somebody, something's got to change. Your responsibility in this case is to handle it. Whether you put them on a PIP, sit them down and counsel them, provide outside mentor, or just fire them, it's going to be your responsibility to yourself, the organization, and your team to do something about this.
I feel like I kind of took this into clunky territory there. So let me do a interim wrap up here real quick. What we were just covering is the first two steps there of acknowledging the error, owning that error. And we went down the road there of talking a little bit about just the things to be thinking about when it comes to what kind of errors you might have, and that distinction between being responsible, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you are specifically to blame for the activity. But that does take on to the next step in the framework we're offering up for you here, which is you've got to apologize. Once you've acknowledged and known the mistake, that's terrific. You're like, oh yeah, my bad. Okay, got it. But you have to apologize. And there are a couple of things about an apology that have to happen for that apology to work. First and foremost, it has to be sincere. And I think we've all been on the receiving end of an insincere apology at one point. I mean, I could guess many of us have. So your apology has to be sincere. And the second piece is it has to be accepted. And this is about the trust that you need to be creating and the environment you need to be creating as a leader so that apologies can be accepted. And I'm going to talk here very briefly about the idea that this is a two-way street. You have to be willing, if you're going to expect people to accept your apologies, you need to be willing to accept apologies. So, you need to demonstrate that along the way. And we've talked throughout this series of discussions about part of a leader's role being to provide good guidance, advice, direction, that GAD, to go into Overwatch, to be available to provide help or direction when somebody needs it. but also that when somebody stumbles, you need to go ahead, get up next to them, get them back up to their feet, help get them going. And that's really a metaphor for accepting an apology. So back to you as the leader, when you've screwed up, you've got to acknowledge it, you've got to own it, and then you have to offer a sincere apology. That apology has to be accepted. You can't control that part, but you can create the conditions that make it more realistic that an apology will be accepted and it will be taken sincerely.
And one point worth making, Cliff, and believe me, I've fallen for this myself. Don't over apologize. Once you've done it and it's been accepted, correct the problem and move on. Now, you have to kind of hit the I believe button. You apologize. Person says, I get it. You don't need to be making those again because you put us in a bad spot, but I got you. Go get it fixed. That it's over. They've heard it. It's in there. And just think about yourself. If someone apologized to you and you heard it and you accepted it, do you need to hear it another 15 times? No. It's in your head. You know what happened, everything else. Well, you don't need to do the same thing. You don't need to reiterate that point. It's there. You've done it. Correct the problem. Move on.
So today, even despite my fumbles and jumbles as we've gone on through this thing, we have cycled through the 5 steps fairly quickly. We've given you the framework that we had to present today for when you have a Joe Bluth moment. And the running joke there is that I threw that out on the table. BJ had no clue what I was talking about. I think it's hilarious. And in case anybody needs to know, that's tied to the show Arrested Development. And Joe Bluth, spelled G-O-B, keeps getting called Gob, but I digress. And mainly, I'm just trying to fill the extra time because we went faster than we thought we would be. Here it is. If you have that mistake, if you've made that mistake as a leader, we'll sum up with the 5 things you need to do. You need to acknowledge it. You need to say, you know what? Yep, that's a mistake. It's an error. It needs to be addressed. Then you need to own it. Hey, I'm responsible. I'm responsible for this team. I'm responsible for everything this team does or fails to do. I've got this. I'm responsible for fixing it. You need to offer that apology. It needs to be sincere. You need to make sure it's accepted. Then you need to take your corrective action. And that really means that you need to demonstrate the things that will address that problem and not continue doing the things that caused it. And finally, you need to move on. And BJ touched on that one when it comes to not over apologizing. If you've apologized and it's been accepted, drive forward. Your people are with you at that point, and what they need from you is to continue leading them through the problem and beyond to success. They don't need you to keep carrying that burden of having made a mistake because you need to get ready to make the next one, quite frankly. Okay, that's a wrap for us today, and I jumped all over BJ's guide here. What we're going to do is go here to, I'm off kilter today.
April just said she accepts responsibility readily, especially if she did not provide enough gatto for the project. Then I make sure it never happens again. April, that's exactly what we're talking about. I've had it happen when you're going through something and the boss says, that's not it. And you have to sit there and go, boss, I'm sorry. They did exactly what I told them. I completely misunderstood what you said. They did a great job with horrible guidance that I gave them. And it comes in lots of flavors, right, Cliff? Sometimes it's like, hey, boss, we're not ready for the presentation. And you're not ready for the presentation. It doesn't matter. Something else fills up the schedule. You move on. You got plenty of time. Those aren't usually the hard ones. The hard ones is when you're up against it as far as a timeline or whatever. Then it gets really tough, I guess.
It does. I mean, at the hardest part there, the mistakes that are the hardest to deal with, the hardest to acknowledge, the hardest to own, frankly, the hardest to apologize for are the ones that either involve and affect lives in a negative way, or sometimes it just affect the financial bottom line of an organization in the worst kind of way. I just recently was, lead within this team here on getting a proposal out to a business we're working with, a strategic partner where we're working with. I mismanaged my time on the front end of that thing, and I ended up delivering the entire package for review to our colleague who's taken the lead on submitting this particular proposal. I got it to him the day before it was due. That was not fair. It was not right. It was not the right thing to do. But what I did was acknowledged it, owned it. I apologized profusely. And then once it was accepted, I moved on. And then as it would happen in this particular case, that proposal went in on time, and that government contract said, oh, but wait, we're going to extend this for another couple of weeks. So we bought some extra time, took it back, took the new guidance that we had, modified it, and I turned that thing around. And this time I got it right to my colleague within a couple of days. And we had a good joke with that. I wrote to him, I was like, hey, here it goes. And he wrote back, said, when's it's due? I said, oh, you have over a week. Sorry, I hope I didn't freak you out by giving you all that lead time. And we had a good laugh about it because I knew he had accepted my apology. He knew that my performance and my approach and my professionalism were well intended, and that I had made a mistake and that I'd owned that and moved on. So with that, we are at that we're at the 15-minute mark where we open it up to questions, and I scroll down and I see Sarah Becca, you have a question. Do you have any fun acronyms for us today? I did not fit one in there. We have AOACM. I don't even know what the heck that means, but I'll work on that one and turn it into an acronym at some point. But I see there's a question following, but seriously, thanks. It can be difficult to not dwell on things. So, Sarah Rebecca, you're saying, you appreciate the reminder to move on once it's been corrected. I'm glad that resonated. Thanks very much. But leadership is hard. It's lonely. It's challenging. It's also deeply satisfying, and seeing a team around you come together, lift up, achieve what they're really capable of achieving. Watching your team outstrip you, I mean, just do things that you could never do on your own is just such a satisfying feeling. But also, you're going to make mistakes as your leader, and it's going to keep happening. it's just going to keep happening. And when it happens, yeah, you need to deal with it and move. And if you have built that team dynamic where you have the trust involved, so that, and you have the interaction involved, so that when you make that mistake, your team gives you the benefit of the doubt right up front, and maybe even comes to you and goes, hey, boss, I know what you're trying to do here, but you really screwed it up. What's going on? Gives you that opportunity for dialogue. The mistakes will end up strengthening your team. And later you're like, hey man, you remember when we got through this thing together? And we're like, oh yeah, it was hilarious. But you'll have those stories. And I think I talked over BJ. He had a flash of bright that he wanted to share here.
Well, I just remember when one of my leaders came one time, actually, he worked for me, and he came in and he had a bunch of things that were coming up, and he was dealing with them as a leader, kind of off topic, sorry. And he said, this problem's going on, this problem's going on. I'm not sure what to do about this. And I looked at him and said, sometimes leadership positions suck, don't they? And he said, yes, they do. So, it's not always glorious, but to bring it back to your point, Sarah Becca, you can remember this on both sides. If you don't dwell on the mistakes, or try your hardest, I mean, they hurt and they stick around for a little bit, but you keep moving. By the same point, try not to dwell as much on those successes, because they are also fleeting, and they will also, kind of be pushed to the side by tomorrow's success or mistake. And so you can use that on both sides and say, well, if this was a success, I wouldn't dwell on it so much because we got to keep going. Well, same thing. If this is a mistake, we shouldn't keep dwelling on it because we got to keep going.
That's that. And we have, unless we have other questions coming in from the audience, I think we'll go ahead and move on into that, standard wrap up that we have, which is, you have my sincere thanks for investing your time with us here today. I apologize for not getting an acronym out. That's my fault. But I know some of you have said those acronyms that we spit out here are a lot of fun. So we'll work on that. But if you've enjoyed this discussion, if you found it valuable, do please keep tuning in. We really love having you folks out there in the audience. We like your questions. We like your positive feedback and comments. So keep tuning in, and do please tell other folks about us. As you know, we go live here at noon Pacific every Wednesday and Friday, and we plan to do that for the foreseeable future. And then we capture these videos, put them together pretty quick. It's not made to be pretty. It's just made to be us. And we're not pretty. And we put those then onto the YouTube channel and then load them up onto our website. So you or anybody you know who might need them or find them relevant can just go and grab a quick 15-minute bite on the topic that is of concern. If you have any ideas for topics you would like us to cover, please send them our way. And then I'm going to hand over the baton back to BJ to do the next part of our standard wrap-up.
We continually update these as we get the topics out, like I said, into next week and the week after. Try to stay about a week and a half, 2 weeks ahead. You'll find them at northofcenter.com, along with all the other great things in our resources tab. Here you'll see them under webinars, and then we'll have them there and you can click and join them. Also, we have our blog in there, and as well as our podcast. We cover some of the same topics, or actually a lot of the same topics, because they're really good ones. So we appreciate you coming, and as some of you have done, as Cliff said, if you're liking these, if you could push our social media stuff we push out, that'd be great. Let people know what's going on. We would really appreciate it.
So in closing, from our family here at North of Center to yours, stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks very much.